Welcome to this amazing conversation we're going to have with four extraordinary people on pathways to wellness. So I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists today. Kelly Davis is the Vice President of Peer and Youth Advocacy at Mental Health America, where she works on the expansion of peer support and young adult leadership. And she holds certificates in yoga, applied positive psychology, mental health leadership. She and her work have appeared in the New York Times, the Stanford Social Innovation Review, the NBC Nightly News, NPR, and the White House. She's currently pursuing a master's degree in public health from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. So welcome, Kelly. Wow, what a CV. Vesper Moore, who's right there, I see him, is the Chief Operating Officer at Kiva Centers, Vice President at Mind Freedom International, and serves on the Bazelon Center for Mental Health Laws Board of Trustees. They are an Indigenous activist and leader, deeply involved in promoting mental health and disability rights through activism, leadership, organizing, public speaking, and education. Vesper has brought perspectives of people with mental illness, challenges, and disabilities to national and international spaces with their advocacy. And they've actively contributed to the establishment of mental health organizations worldwide and have fought to uplift civil rights in the United States. Solome Tibebu is a behavioral health strategist and founder and CEO of Behavioral Health Tech, the largest community dedicated to advancing access to mental health and substance abuse services through technology, health equity, and innovation. Previously, she was the founding director of the Upswing Fund for Adolescent Mental Health, a philanthropic fund seeded by Pivotal Ventures. And through the Upswing Fund, Tibebu has and her team have funded over 100 community-based organizations and nonprofits nationwide, focused on supporting the health of LGBTQ plus teens and adolescents of color. And today she is a co-chair of Pivotal Ventures Council, designing the next Youth Mental Health Fund. Tibebu has been a mental health advocate specialist since she started the Anxiety in Teens blog at the amazing age of 16. She's an Aspen Health Fellow and a Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute Senior Fellow. And it's my pleasure to be here facilitating this. I'm David Wertheimer, recovering New Yorker. For many years ran the Gay and Lesbian Anti-Violence Project in New York City, moved to Seattle and did a bunch of things, but ended up at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and now am delightfully retired. And it's an honor to be working with Laura Van Tosh, our incredible leader, and also with this incredible panel today. So our focus today is pathways to wellness, America's youth and behavioral health care. And the first question I want to open up to our four panelists is related to something Dr. Vivek Murthy has said about youth and loneliness. He's spoken passionately about this topic. And when you think about, for the four of you, the three of you, when you think about dealing with the complex issues that youth face related to their mental health, how do you see loneliness fitting into both their experience and also how we need to respond to their situations? So who would like to dive in?
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Please.
Thank you again, David and Laura, for inviting me to be part of this excellent conversation. I mean, right off the bat, I think about when I was a teen, it was like, oh my goodness, who is online? Who's talking to whom on AOL AIM chat? Remember that? And now the technologies, the social media platforms, it's exacerbated so much of this FOMO. And I can't even imagine being a teen today with all of the platforms, social media tools on top of the pressures.
Recording in progress.
So for me, looks like there's a little echo. Okay, maybe it's just me. For me, I think back not only to the social media component, but as somebody with lived experience with obsessive compulsive disorder and panic attacks, I was extra alone in that journey. And there's just so much shame surrounding my obsessive thoughts and the compulsions that would have to go with them. I couldn't talk to even friends about it, family members, certainly not. And so that just really elevated it that much more, which unfortunately I think is still the case for a lot of young people.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I can share a little bit. I think, when you think about being a teenager, being a young adult, a big part of that are these huge questions, right? Who am I? Where do I fit? Who are my people? Where do I belong? So, not being able to figure that out is something that I think has always been a struggle for folks. I do think certainly that social media and the ability to attach metrics to whether or not someone likes you and for everyone to be able to see those is a very intense experience that kind of older generations just have not had to deal with at such a sensitive age in your development. I will say though, thinking about there isn't one youth experience, there isn't one type of young person. And I think for a lot of communities, to Salome's point and the work that she created, if you have a disability, if you're LGBTQ, especially if you're like in an area where there's a lot of hostility towards LGBTQ youth, digital spaces are actually really, really, really important for belonging. So I think the narrative that social media is bad is kind of leading the headlines right now. And I do think digital spaces are right, they're community spaces. So I think that they're really, really powerful for folks. They're harmful, just like community spaces can be harmful, but they're also powerful for giving people kind of anonymous spaces to connect. I do think that it also has, and I'll just make one more. I'm not going to go on a tirade because we just got started. But I do think one of the things that's also really important to think about is, right, like, everything occurs in a political context. So when you think about increasing rates of trauma and the impact of trauma and exposure to violence in communities, the kind of political discourse and climate, like all of these really, really overwhelming, isolating experiences as we continue to not invest in the spaces where young people made friends historically, whether that's like parks or different community spaces that aren't like spend money, go to school, go home, or even youth sports and youth music. So I think that a lot of things that are kind of framed as like, if we got to cut something, this is the first thing we cut, is really, really harmful for young people's sense of community, belonging, and long-term development. And then I'll pass it over to Vesper.
Thanks, Kelly. Vesper.
Yeah, I think just to add to a lot of the wonderful points that Kelly and Solome have really touched on, I think first, it's important to understand youth and young adults as a social class that have their own unique issues. When you are under the age of 18, there are some unique issues in terms of what you have access to, what consent versus assent looks like for youth and young adults. So I like to say that, but I also like to say that when we think about social media too, it's as Kelly was saying, that positive aspect of having community, which can also at times be negative with things such as constantly living your life in the public eye, in the public view. A loss of that sense of privacy at times, which can feel isolating, even though you would think that there would be more connection associated with it. Which is why thinking of the Surgeon General's report and thinking of those aspects on isolation, it's so important. What does true connection look like? What does social connection look like in a way that really works for us? I also think, and be amiss to say that we didn't these last few years live in a state of hypervigilance for years on end, for potentially being exposed to a global virus, right? So I think there's definitely that state of both direct and indirect trauma that changed a lot of life circumstances. I think that's an important piece. I think youth and young adults also, when we think about just economically where we are, the federal minimum wage has not changed that much, but the cost of living has significantly increased. Most youth and young adults are struggling in terms of permanent housing and in terms of a lot of things. And I think particularly when we talk about young adult peer support, when we talk about young adult advocates who are working towards social change, it's hard for that work to be sustainable when life isn't economically sustainable. So I think those are some of the things that I want to mention as we go into this conversation.
Thank you all. What a rich introduction through the first question and the sort of the themes that all three of you have touched on related to belonging and the sort of unique challenges faced by youth and young adults, the issues related to social media and the loss of privacy, and both the connection and the isolation that social media can produce for youth and young adults. The direct and indirect trauma and the economic challenges that youth and young adults face with the minimum wage and the challenges of making ends meet financially. So emotionally, financially, spiritually, physically, all of these things are very relevant to youth and young adults. So as we think about this really challenging larger context, why don't we dive into our second question, which is really related to the most challenging issues that the three of you see youth and young adults facing today related to substance abuse and their mental health. How does this issue specifically create additional complications for youth struggling with their own well-being, with their own mental health, and the risks of a co-occurring substance use disorder? What are your thoughts about that? Whoever would like to dive in, please.
I mean, I can, oh, go ahead, Vesper. No, I talked first, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to start with, I think there is at times this need to self-medicate around a lot of these issues. I think, people could argue whether or not if it's actually, addressing any of those core issues or if it's a temporary solution to a long-term problem. But there's definitely, I think when we look at substances in general, I think there is this important movement around wellbriety and ideas of sobriety and redefining what that looks like. Our relationship to substances, which for certain cultures are thought of as plant medicines and a wide variety of other things. But I think particularly when do we start utilizing a substance in a way where it's harmful, right? And I think that looks different for every person. I think these things do go hand in hand when we talk about the impact of trauma on our communities and the impact of what isolation looks like, and we see a pursuit of consuming substances that could lead to feelings of pleasure in moments of isolation, and how that could lead to overutilization, I think is a huge thing that we are seeing right now. I also don't think our society was or has been equipped for the level of isolation we've experienced the last few years. So that, amongst with the advancement of technology, it can be a lot more easier to just use a substance at home, sitting in place, especially when it feels like you can just connect with people at your fingertips. There isn't really as much of that need to go outside anymore. Now, there's positives with that. When we talk about accessibility in the disability community, it's huge that we have social connection in these ways. But I think there is definitely, I think, more of a conversation when we talk about substance use and isolation, substance use when struggling to connect with others, and substance use when there's so much social expectation of you at that point in your life. You're supposed to be this adult all at once, and you're supposed to have your life figured out in the matter of just a few years. And And again, pointing to the economic issues, the pressures of that are basically like, well, I'm not going to be this accomplished adult in a few years. This is really stressful. Here are some ways that I can, cope in the short term.
Mhm. Wow, thank you.
I would add, agree with everything and second everything Vesper said. So I am renegotiating my way of describing that I don't drink anymore. But I'm someone who grew up with pretty intense substance use challenges. And for me, I think part of it is not shaming folks and not focusing exclusively on the substance, because when I talk about my lived experience, I talk about feeling like I was born without skin. And the first time I drank, it was like, oh my God, I have something that puts up a barrier between me and the world. And if you are so focused on taking my barrier without giving me any support around what else, I think this focus of don't drink, don't do drugs, it like misses like some of the tools that people really need to thrive and to be able to support themselves. I think three core things in recovery that we're seeing kind of dissolve among young people, right, is hope. Do you think with everything happening in the world, do you have like a narrative or sense that anything's going to get better, which a lot of young people do not? To Vesper's point, a sense of agency. Can I grow? Can I grow in my community? Can I grow in my work? Can I grow in my education? Again, there's so many like economic barriers. And then connection, right? And we talked a little bit about kind of the fraying social fabric. So I think when so much of youth substance use, don't use is, how do we get people more access to mental health services, substance use services? But if we don't address these things like hope, like connection, like agency, so people have, the tools to advance their lives in the way that they want, to find meaning in the way that they want, but also to support themselves, we kind of miss the whole point because we're not solving for the reason a lot of people are using substances. So that's kind of from my lived experience and what I've seen.
Thanks, Kelly. That was a powerful, powerful metaphor of being born without skin. That's really potent. And I think your also your sense of the importance of hope, of agency and growth and of connection. Those three things are really so essential to the well-being of our young people today. Solome.
Yeah, I have to agree. Such a great analogy, Kelly. Thank you for sharing that. And to Vesper, your point about the impacts of COVID are ongoing, even if we're out of a pandemic. I mean, that really can't be more true for young people. And it's easy to lose hope with those continued issues ongoing. And so I think it's not surprising that we're seeing the substance use issues amongst younger and younger people. For me, I've been, I guess, pleasantly delighted to see that innovators in our space have started building for young people first. For so long, we've had traditional services, but also VC-backed, innovative, novel digital mental health startups that have been built for adults. And many of them are trying to retrofit their existing solution to address young people. But really, I've only in the last year or two seen a substance use solution built for teens. And so I think that's really promising and exciting and really critical too, because young people expect something different. They need a solution built for them if they're actually going to engage and sustainably use something. So I think this is really important.
Thanks, Solome. That's really potent, and I love your concept of the innovation of building systems of care for young people first. Then what are the needs of young people as we think about them in terms of their own well-being, their own mental health, their own ability to function in an increasingly complicated, and as we were talking about earlier, although despite our many social connections, isolated world. So that's really, thank you, very potent.
If I can just
yeah,
add
please.
onto that, so I do think that the focus on I like to share, I won the DARE award and I ended up in AA. So a lot of the ways that we historically focused on substance use among young people is really like criminalization, or these prevention programs. I think one of the really, really important things, I don't believe that traditional services are by any stretch of the imagination the solution, but I do think that what's really important right now with a lot of the policy action going on around parity and forcing health insurance plans to not discriminate against anyone, including young people with mental health or substance use disorders. I like laid in the hospital bed with my friend after she overdosed on heroin, and her insurance company said she didn't need treatment after 7 days. They said we're not paying anymore, and she couldn't go to treatment anymore. So there's a lot of structural barriers that, for young people, force their parents, even my lived just to bring in an example, right? So when I was hospitalized, I had Medicaid paid for inpatient, Medicaid paid for outpatient, Medicaid would not pay for IOP. And they were like, your parents need to take out a $15,000 loan for us to let you out of this hospital. So I think that there's the kind of community, but we can't ignore these like massive corporate interests that deny people support that they need as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful, Kelly. So moving on to our third question. And then before we open it up to the full group, I want to have an interesting dialogue across the three of you about what each of you have said. But for this third question, what do each of you think are the best pathways to ensuring that the peer voice among youth is both heard and incorporated into the development and implementation of mental health policies? What are the best ways to do that? Who'd like to go first?
I mean, I'll say that I think we need to continue to educate the established legacy organizations that have the power to reach and engage young people, that their outcomes are going to be better if youth are co-developing the solutions together with them. And there's, people on this call that have done such great work to engage young people in their solution design and policy advocacy work. And so the data is there. And I think the more that we can, as advocates, continue to spread that message, young people will continue to get more opportunities.
That's wonderful.
I think involving youth and young adults in policy is huge. And I know Kelly and Mental Health America does a really great job of that. And the training that is done, particularly around youth policies, is immensely important. And I think, I'd often say this, for people with life experience in general, it's important to include us in the inception, the creation, and the design of services and what these things look like. And I think it's very true for youth, because when you have life experience, right, and you are a young person navigating a wide variety of service systems in a society where most people were adults, and those adults haven't been a youth or a young adult at the time you are currently. There's a lack of understanding of the current issues that impact your life today. That's because our world changes, or social issues change, a wide variety of things change. So I think it's important for, I think, adults as allies to really ensure that young adults, particularly young adults with life experience, are there throughout the policy development process and creation process. I think in terms of advocacy, it's huge, yes, for youth and young adults to come together, learn about civil rights histories and actions and some of the work that's been done. But you can offer a wide variety of knowledge, but when we are not offered a seat at the table, we end up not getting that far. So I think it's immensely important to think of it in that way.
Thanks, Vesper. Well said.
Our youth, and I can actually share this paper in the chat. So our Youth Leadership Council a couple years ago wrote a paper on intergenerational collaboration and mental health. So it's a youth-led guide on how adults can work with young people and engage young people and some of the nuances of what that looks like on their end. I think the two major points that I would make, one is that it requires a lot of humility and commitment, because there's a lot of, even if you don't like, I think a lot of adults, like, they're like, I'm nice, young people will feel empowered to talk to me. And it's like, that's not really how it works across all lived experience. So I think the report is really helpful. There's a lot of training, Youth Move does a lot of systems training. We do it in the policy space. The other thing that it's like one of my, soapbox things is that I think it also has to be the ongoing evaluation. So like, as an example, there is a lot of conversation about mental health literacy and education in schools through policy right now. But like, how do we make sure it's working from young people's perspective, and how do we continue to evaluate and improve it? Because that is like the big fear of mine is, first, are young people consulted or like involved in choosing measures or anything like that? But also it's like, once something is done, it's not really done in policy. So I think really making sure that young people are brought in a meaningful, ongoing way to see if, right, when you make policy, you're making new problems you don't anticipate. So like, how can we have young people in an ongoing way help evaluate and adjust?
Thank you. And Laura, I think you have something you want to ask related to this. So please.
Yeah, if it's okay. I just,
Please.
because I got involved when I was a young adult. At the time, I was about 19, and was kind of the cusp of my engagement in the advocacy field, for the most part. And what I remember though is, I needed to also work a job and also volunteer my time and figure out, is this something I really want to dedicate my time to? And I just wonder about young adults now that struggle with, where they were, going back to school or needing to get a full-time job to support themselves or their family, and how you bring people in that are doing what you're explaining, but where do they have the time to do that? And that, we're not talking about kind of nursing young people till they become full-time advocates, but we need full-time advocates that are young adults, to really get involved in what Vesper's talking about and what you're talking about, Kelly. So do you run across that where you really need more and more people to get involved, but just because of the nature of the lives they lead, it's difficult to find people to kind of give it their all and be the full-time advocates that would really be ideal?
So for us, we pay the young people we work with so that they can prioritize doing the work. Obviously, like, not all grassroots organizations, we're in a position of power as MHA. But I think at all levels, if folks really believe in addressing youth mental health, substance use, and well-being, there has to be a commitment to providing compensation, including right. It's like way easy, you're traveling across the city, there's a lot of costs that come with it, in addition to time that someone could have spent working, especially if they're supporting themselves or other people in their families. The other thing that I would say is, like, a lot of young people and people who are doing this work also aren't able to find help or afford help for themselves at the same time. So the degree to which you can also leverage your network as someone who's well connected to connect the youth who you're working with to additional resources and support, I think is also important, because, as I mentioned, the power imbalances, I think everyone with lived experience can attest to this, is like this urge that you have to put on a mask and be a person who they can check had lived experience, but doesn't live their experience, is extra complicated for young people who have all of these things going on. So I think, a lot of this is talked about in the report, but I think financial compensation, and then also like creating spaces where people can be honest and leveraging your network to support them and connect them to resources.
Thanks, Kelly. And that concept of putting on a mask is so powerful because it's something that so many of us do in so many different contexts and every day. So thank you. So before we open it up for general questions, I wonder, for the three of you, what reactions do you have to what each of you has said today, and what comments would you like to make based on what you've heard from your fellow panelists?
I definitely need people to read my intro before everybody else's intro next time around. It's just really impressive panelists and amazing contributions. And again, Kelly, thank you for sharing your personal experience. I think that just really brought it to life for so many people.
Yeah, agreed.
I want to say I so appreciate Solome and Kelly for both of y'all's contributions. You have a lot of deep wisdom in these areas, and I want to say that in terms of technology and youth, artificial intelligence, and particularly machine learning algorithms and digital phenotyping, and all of these different issues that youth and young adults face as it relates to tech and technological advancement. I appreciate that you've held kind of those two truths, right? This is an opportunity for social connection. In one regard, there are communities that are well established and led by young adults in digital spaces. We don't want that to go away. Simultaneously, there is like a need to figure out what does it look like moving forward to ensure that people do not have their rights violated on digital platforms and in community spaces, and that they're not harmed socially in those spaces. And what does that look like? And I guess there's not really like a perfect answer, because I feel like innovation outpaces that regulation, right? And what that looks like. But I do feel hopeful in a way that we're having conversations about these issues now. And that particularly Solome and Kelly are doing a lot of advocacy in this space where youth issues and tech intersect. That makes me hopeful as well.
Kelly,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
Oh yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I cry at least once a day, so I'm gonna try not to cry when I say I appreciate everything that both of you have shared. I think it's really powerful and it's really cool, how amazing the difference that both of you make and continue to make. I want to echo, first, I think it's really awesome to see how we need people at kind of all different spaces, whether it's federal policy, community organizing, global coalition building, behavioral health technology, like all of these things are mental health, and we need mental health people throughout all of these spaces. So I think that it's cool that we have kind of different perspectives and experiences and work that we're focused on right now. I'll probably email you, Solome, about this and Vesper, because this just made me think. I think one of the things that keeps me up at night is I do feel like a lot of our kind of advocacy frameworks exist from a world that is very quickly not existing anymore. So I am working with some folks at like Carnegie Mellon and Nev Jones around like participatory algorithm design. Like I do think that there's going to be a real need for us to apply the lived experience and disability rights framework to a rapidly changing world that will not just affect young people, but they will kind of most long-term be affected by. So I think there's a lot of wisdom that we can, like, Laura has been at the forefront. Lots of folks for decades have been really building wisdom and leadership. And I think I'm excited and nervous to see how we can kind of bridge that forward to what the future looks like.
Thank you. And I have to say, as I'm listening to the three of you, I just had a very potent couple of days because about 22 years ago, one of my best friends from graduate school, who was living in San Francisco, called me up, and I hadn't heard from him in about 6 months. And I said, "Hey, what's going on?" He said, "Well, He said, I've become addicted to crack. I've lost everything. He was a lawyer in San Francisco. And I have no idea what to do. And if you tell me to go to the Golden Gate Bridge right now and jump off, that's what I'm going to do. And I said, where are you right now? And he said, well, I'm in what's left of my home. I said, don't move. And I flew down to San Francisco and went to his home, which was terrifying. It was a crack den full of other folks who were struggling with addiction. And I extracted him from there. And I put him on a plane and sent him to a friend in New York, another of our friends from graduate school, who put him into a intensive residential treatment program. And he just came to visit us this week, celebrating his retirement from being 15 years on the federal bench as a judge. Incredible story of recovery and resilience. And the empathy he had for the people in his courtroom was extraordinary because of his own experience. And listening to the three of you, I'm hearing how important bringing the personal stories and bringing our experiences into our work is, and how potent it can be in helping folks who are struggling with mental health, with addiction, with the issues that can be so unraveling in life. And the number of people that my friend has helped as a judge and as a sponsor in NA, it's been just extraordinary because of the love he received from his own friends. So I thank you all for your wisdom today in that.
Wonderful, David.
Yeah, well, he's a pretty amazing
kind
guy.
of piggies back on a comment I want to read here from
Please.
David Oakes, who I hope he's still on, but if not, I'll let him know that I did read his comment. He's a person with significant physical disability due to an accident, but has continued to march the march, man, around patient advocacy and using less forceful measures to support each other. And he said, I'd like to add one thing. When we say lived experience, let's remember lived experience of human rights violations in the mental health system.
Yes.
In other words, lived experience really cuts across the good and the bad and the ugly, you know what I mean? And he went on to say, I can only be on for a few minutes. Love you all. Hashtag Mad Pride and email revolution@aciu.info. So David is with us. He may have had to log off, but appreciate his words. Thank you so much, David. Both David Oakes and David Wertheimer.
Thank you, Laura. Well, now in our last few minutes here, let's open it up for questions for our panelists from other people who are participating in this amazing conversation. So anyone with questions? I see Thomas Jackson, your hand is up. Yes, sir.
So, hi, my name is Thomas Jackson. I'm the program director for the Washington Peer Network. And my question is so I'm building a statewide network. And one of the disconnects that I find is that having seasoned peers trying to in like the behavioral health and substance use space, like what are some of the tools or some of the conversations that you guys are having to bridge that?
Oh, I think you froze there, Thomas.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, I just mannequined for a second. That's all. That's all good. But what I was saying is, what are some of the tools and conversations that you guys are having to necessarily bridge those gaps between seasoned peers and youth peers?
Great question. Who'd like to tackle that?
I can come in with that. I think public education and training is a huge part of it. I think really sharing what the work has looked like over the years when we talk about peer support. is an important piece. There's a lot of youth and young adults who I think come in to the work and they might just be learning about it, or they might just be brought on the premise of their life experience, as we were just talking about earlier, but they might not fully understand the role yet. There are quite a few different aspects to peer support. It's a culturally responsive practice where we try to understand a lot of these things and build that level of connection. And I think when we talk about mental health and substance use, recovery related peer supports, there's a lot of connections, and then sometimes there's disconnect. I find with substance use recovery peer support, there's an accountability practice to supporting someone in their approach to staying sober, if that's what they're seeking at that time. And then whereas when I find with like mental health peer support, it's following someone alongside their journey as they're processing a lot. And I think that there's also that in substance use recovery peer support, but I think those things can look and function and be different at times. And every state approaches this differently. We're going through a massive behavioral health expansion right now, where it is important that peer supporters be able to support people with substance use recovery experiences and mental health experiences. But I do think there's a like a rights and advocacy component as well when we talk about navigating service systems, asking what services are we accessing? Are those services on our terms? Understanding what those things look like, centering and prioritizing self-determination. So I do think that there's intergenerational education. I think youth and young adults can teach adults a lot about the work, and I think adults can teach youth and young adults a lot about the work. And I think those conversations should happen on state and territory levels throughout the United States. And I think a way to do that is for people to understand the history of how we got here to do some of the work in peer support. So I'm talking about like the Bill White papers, consumer survivor, ex-patient movement, talking about movements around NA and AA, movements speaking out about human rights violations in institutions, but also like the self-help movement, the consumer movement. Why was there a response to all of these things? Why do we have services that are led by people with life experience? And I think when you really get to all of that, it's like, oh, it's a better overall approach for our health and our lives because it reduces the potential direct or indirect impact of trauma in our society. So I think that the intergenerational conversations, the history and the wisdom gets at that. So
Yeah, I just want to super emphasize the intergenerational component, because I think obviously there's differences across different communities, but I think collectively the US is a very short-term gains, short-term like crisis-oriented society, obviously from a systems design, but more broadly. And I think that it is countercultural to push intergenerational prioritization, right? We need to really have this shift around what does it look like to build a better world for the people who we might not even meet. So I think that some of it is just like a cultural shift away from the only thing that matters is right now. But I would also say in the kind of attitude differences that I've seen on the adult side is like, I know a lot more than I did when I was a young person, so young people don't know anything.
Right.
And I think on the youth side, old people don't understand me. I don't want to listen to anything that they say. So I don't think either side is completely right. And it's really important to create spaces where we're fostering those conversations. An example or an approach that I think does a really good job with this is climate cafes. I can share a link, but it's just creating spaces for intergenerational dialogue and support. I think it's important, obviously, to have youth peer support, to have peer support driven, and, you know, only you can really define what peerness means to you. Being a young person is different, but I don't think collectively we do a good job trying to create spaces where everybody's expertise and identity and point in life is respected and valued. So that's what I would add on. Intergenerationally, I think we need a cultural shift, and I think we need more spaces to talk to and respect one another.
Thanks, Kelly. Solome, I saw you smiling and nodding to a lot of what Kelly was saying. Anything you'd like to add?
I mean, to both of them, I think the only thing I could add is, as both of them had mentioned earlier, was the need for humility for the adults to embrace all of this. I think that's an important ingredient to success, and going back to showing the outcomes that really amazing things could come out of forums where that atmosphere is created.
Thank you. So
Thank you,
I'm
guys.
curious. Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, thank you guys so much. That was some really good information that is definitely going to carry over, and I'm definitely going to implement that. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
David, we have another hand up. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, no, I don't.
Okay, I was curious. Jamie Franey, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Jamie. I serve as the director of the Center for School Behavioral Health at Mental Health America of Greater Houston. Huge fan of Kelly. I probably stalk her on LinkedIn because she is truly, I think, a role model for the work that I'm trying to do. And so Solome and Vesper, it's great to listen to you all. Thank you so much for your work that you're doing as well. My question is, so I've been advocating for a youth advisory board for like 2.5 years now, finally got approval for it. And we sent out applications. It's just for youth in the Greater Houston area. And we have spots for 10 to 12 people, and they will be paid. And we got 70 applications. Ooh. And this is our first time doing it. So I was super, super excited about that. And my efforts from the start have been to really be the bus driver or flying the airplane while the youth build and do what they want to do, and I'm there to support. So because of that, up to this point, everything that's happened, the application, the scoring system, the marketing materials, all of that has been done by the youth students on our planning committee. Now that it's time to like hit the ground running, I'm nervous. I'm like, oh my God, what did I sign myself up for? Because I am having trouble, and I think this speaks to the comments a lot of you all are making. I'm having trouble because my number one goal is to let them drive and tell us what to do. Like when I say drive, I mean I'm providing, funding support or it may be expertise in some area. But I got kind of stuck when I was thinking about how to even allow them to create a space where ideas can bubble to the top without my influence. And so any I guess thoughts, suggestions on how to do that? Again, we have about 10 to 12 spots for the youth to fill up. And so the youth that were on the planning committee are now doing interviews to narrow down that group. We've already scored applications and all of that. But I just really feel like, okay, we have these 10 that are going to be dedicated. And when I tell you they are brilliant, these youth today are doing things far, far, far that I even imagined at their age. But also, is there an opportunity to use the remaining 50 to 60 applicants maybe in some way later on down the road or what have you? I just don't want to lose an opportunity when so many young people want to be in conversation around mental health. I don't want to lose that opportunity to engage them as well. So thank you so much. And yeah, any and all thoughts are welcome.
Well, thanks for a great question and congratulations on the amazing success it sounds like you're having there in Houston. So any responses from our panelists? And it looks like other people have comments as well, but let's start with our panelists.
You can see that how that could be challenging. Is there an opportunity to make each youth facilitator or teach some of the youth some facilitation skills perhaps, but they're actually leading the meeting to help guide the ideas to bubble up?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. First, I'm excited to hear your voice. I was like, oh my gosh. So thankfully you're here. And yeah, I think that like first it's like spending more time on relationship building than you think you might have to. One of the biggest things that the youth leaders we work with is like we like doing the stuff, but we like each other. So I think it's really important to give them space to connect and to bring in like colors, music, all that stuff. But yeah, I would let the youth give you thoughts around how to engage the other folks. Because like if being rejected always stinks, but being a teen who's rejected after you disclose really sensitive information about yourself really is unpleasant. And right, because things seem so much bigger when you're that age than they do now. So I think working with them to try to figure that out. And then the only other two major points that I would say is like one of the things that I feel like ends up going kind of wrong in those spaces is a lack of transparency about what's possible. Because I think sometimes people overcorrect for like anything goes. But if that's not true, then I think you have to be like really honest up front. But yeah, I think it just for a lot of the young people we work with, like partner to host like mental health events in the community. Like I think that there's a lot of ways that you can work with the folks you select to create programming. But I also just want to say like it's really awesome that you're thinking about that because a lot of programs don't. So just
Thank you. That was really helpful. And the other area that if anyone can offer any tips is, so I'm also the liaison, if you will, between our nonprofit leadership and this youth advisory board. So they're not directly engaged. So I have to be able to convey messaging to get approval from our executive leadership for some of the things that the youth, are going to be doing. So I'm 100% with you on the lack of transparency and how that might surface as barriers or challenges or even lies. If we say, oh, we're here to support whatever you want to do, and then they come with an idea and we're like, well, our lawyers say that we can't cover that. So I think that's huge. So thank you so much.
I would just say something that takes 3 seconds.
Please.
The other thing that I would say is this is something that we hear a lot from the young people we work with is just the importance of bidirectionality. So
Yes.
what do they want to get out of this and what kind of professional development opportunities would matter to them? Because I think a lot of times, like even if they're excited, if you're in a youth, I don't know if Vesper and Solome can, but I think a lot of times people treat youth advocates like kind of like child stars, where like suddenly you realize no one helped you build skills. And like you put not saying that this is certainly not what you're doing, but I think something that happens in a lot of youth programs and initiatives is that there's not the kind of investment in like professional and personal development for the youth who are participating in the program. That was more than 3 seconds, but I think that's a really important idea.
Great comment. Yeah.
I love that addition of like basically having to constantly be in the public, sharing your story, doing that, right? That means, and I think that there is a difficulty to that. I've seen so many young adults who have shared their story and it's been widely publicized, and like the challenge of that and the exhaustion that can come from that is its own. I've shared my story in like local newspapers, and I've had it circulate through multiple newspapers, and they just know me as like, oh, you're the young adult that was like institutionalized like as a teenager, right? So and then that follows you for a long
Mhm.
time. It's
Yeah.
exhausting. It's difficult. It's you're the only thing that seems to be valued is what happened to you, and not that you are a subject matter expert in any regard, you know. And there's a challenge with that. So I think that's an important emphasis. Thank you, Kelly.
Great. Other comments? One of the things there's a couple of questions. I just want to make one comment that based on what Jamie was saying, that it's so important for those of us who are in leadership roles as adults in organizations to listen to and value the voices of youth and the wisdom they bring to our conversations. That's so important. So Jamie, thank you for sharing that. And I think we had Carlito and Chris that both had questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, it wasn't really a question, it's more of feedback, because what resonated to me today, and thank you for this. This is wonderful. This is my first roundtable listening in. Kelly Davis, thank you for providing Climate Cafe. I'm going to look into it. I was looking at it while you were speaking. One thing, maybe it's just a brainstorm I had. The reason that as a grown up and as a parent, I was hospitalized a couple times in IOP, and kind of what you said, Kelly, about IOP. It's not provided by Medicaid. When my daughter went and became went to IOP, and she was really stressed with college, and my son also is going through it now. He's 17, 18 with college applications. But I had more empathy. I had more empathy for them because of my experience in IOP. And I don't know, a brainstorm of somehow there's got to be, like, we hear the term peer support, lived experience. There's got to be a way to mesh those two, where the parents who are in that same room with the kids in the processing at IOP can somehow be advocates or peer supports for the younger generation. Because I do have an eye for some of my kids' peers who are in spaces like this, finding community, finding IOP. And luckily for us, we were able to afford the IOP for my daughter. But if some families can't, and they think it's just a place to go and institutionalize, and just kind of, because some parents kind of find me in the community because I'm a crisis counselor, and they feel afraid to ask for resources. I just love the idea of Climate Cafe. And something I seen and heard out there was a podcast called Space Makers. It was about the younger generation making space to put out their struggles in the LGBTQI plus community, with the parents of that generation who were slandering them as well as judging them in public. So I found this very fascinating, just how we can create communities somehow where those adult generation folks who have experience and have empathy can allow the younger generation to speak up more. And then that's maybe where we can meet. But I love that idea of Climate Cafe. And that's just feedback I wanted to give to you guys. There's really no question. And thank you for this. This is very helpful. I really appreciate everyone here. Thank you.
Thanks, Leto, and thanks for that great
Well, I just
contribution to our
want to
conversation.
add a
Chris
quick,
Jensen, go, Laura, go ahead. Chris and then
just a
Fiona,
quick
but go ahead, Laura.
jump in for Carlito and anyone else, and especially Fiona, who has a really good comment in chat. And that is that our systems, for number one, I'm really happy that we did this as well. This is the first time that there's been a session dedicated to young adult issues, by the way. It's been 25 years. So I'll confess, anyhow, this is like about time. And it makes me wonder about all the other topics that are out there for the younger sets. And then also all of us as a group of people. And I say that because at the state level, there are these planning bodies we have. The block grant is a planning advisory board in every state, and they're kind of delineated with the kinds of people that are engaged on advisory boards. And I think the opportunities that we have to work together, usually in planning processes or advocacy projects, or even development of new programs, which I could see Kelly does on a daily basis, engaging with other parts of our populations, really makes a big difference. So I just wanted to add that in as much as any of us can join up with planning, any other kinds of activities outside of this roundtable is a good start. So I just want to echo your spirit, Carlito, and your efforts.
Great. So let's do Fiona's question next, since it seems relevant, and then Chris Jensen, you're up after that. So Fiona, should we read your question, or do you want to ask it directly to the group?
Sorry, I'm at a library, so like it's a
Oh,
little
okay.
tricky.
Then
But,
I
so,
will
yeah,
I will
thank you so
read your
much.
question for you, if that's right. Fiona also wanted to ask, related to Jamie's concern, as a young person, there it is. As a young person, almost afraid, have been rejected from programs like this, it almost feels like even this cause is a professional race. Does anyone have any advice to stay involved and contribute effectively? Great question.
This is like something as a kind of aside, but related, that I wanted to mention and didn't have time to. It's not every young person. So like, one of the highest risk for mental health distress communities is these young people who are in like extremely competitive academic environments. Yeah. And I do think that the like professionalization of being a young person is just absurd. That like you can't even enjoy recreational sports. You have to try to be a D1 athlete. I think it's just like destroying the well-being of a lot of people. But I think, yeah, totally. And we see that too. Sometimes folks will call out their peers for like resume padding of like, I want to take up as much space as possible, so that I can look like the fanciest and most competitive person. So that's definitely a real thing. And I think it's part of the reason why I think like community-based organizations are so important, and having things like climate cafes or community activities or something, because I think part of the point, like if we want to build this world we're talking about, we have to like embody that world to some degree. So I do think that connecting with local community members and building community space is kind of like the point. And then the other thing that I would just say related to Laura's comment is I've been on this kick where I think someone should collaborate to like bring together and identify all of the opportunities, like the mental health block grants. Like people don't know what that is, but there's positions at the state level in like every state for young people to lead. So something there I think to consider as well. But yeah, I mean there's so much need, and I think that like being on a youth council is like cool and fun, but it's not far from the only way to contribute or be engaged.
Thanks. I agree. So Chris Jensen, I saw your hand up earlier. Do you have a question?
Well, a few questions and just a comment. First of all, thank you very much. This is my first time at this as well, and I'm begging for additional information and feedback. A little bit of history is 10 years ago this July, I lost my son to during a mental health drug-induced crisis situation live. And to tell you the truth, I went underground and was pissed off at the world, if you will, for 10 years. And finally came to the realization I don't want to go to my grave without having done something to further cause this becoming much more problematic across our country. And so I'm now a part of a board that is standing up a rehabilitation center here in Richland, in Tri-Cities area, Richland, Washington. Washington is where I'm from. And it will be geared towards kind of a one-stop shop for addressing those with both mental health and addiction, and provide a number of services, one of which will be a youth and young adult component of services too. So this has been very valuable for me to listen to y'all in terms of your input and help guide me in a direction I can take back to my board and to the center. And I guess my fundamental question is this roundtable is actually forwarded to me by one of our fellow board members, and I think I'm the only one that is joined. But how do we get more in terms of participation in these types of events? And is there a process by which, as we move forward with opening the doors to this center, we're going to encounter a lot of hurdles that you all will probably be very helpful in terms of helping guide us, especially in terms of the youth component. So with that, I'll open it up to just comments or suggestions or ways in which I can tap you in the.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'll speak for the group at this point that roundtable meetings are infrequent, but they occur. There'll probably be 2 or 3 more for 2024. And I've included in the chat my email address, so please send me an email and I'll gladly add you to the email list to be notified for future meetings. There are also, depending on where you live, maybe let me know a little bit about where you're coming from. I can refer you to some other activities in your state or community if I'm able to, or at least direct you to a space where you might be able to get more information ongoingly. So
Thank you.
that would be helpful. Absolutely.
I think it's thanks to Laura and David for doing such a great job curating folks to continue its popularity.
Oh, that's Laura.
Thank you so much, Solome. And I just want to make sure people know that Solome has a conference every year at this point. Am I right? It's called Behavioral Health Tech.
Yep.
And it's just really a phenomenal activity that I followed on LinkedIn and got wind of it and thought, oh my gosh, I need to meet this person. And I did, and it was really through the, your gracefulness and willingness to reach out that we were able to partner on this program today. And Vesper and Kelly, I know also through the public sector, and I'm so glad that all 3 of you could present together. And I'm planning on attending your conference in November. Solome, there's November 4th through 7th. Do you want to put in chat your the website?
Yep. Yes, I did. Thanks so much, Laura. Yes, definitely welcome folks to join us.
Yeah, it's the place to be. It's really to put it in a t-shirt format, the place to show up. So very excited about that. And I'm just excited that the roundtable has actually brought people together. And, we realize that some of these issues that we talk about are extremely difficult, but we all, scoot up to the table and make a decision to roll our sleeves up and talk about it for an hour or so. And I think you can't go wrong with that. So thank you to everyone who decided to spend an hour this week with the roundtable. And again, thank you so much, David Wertheimer. You did a great job. Yeah.
It's all our panelists, so thank you.
Absolutely.
The wisdom of the 3 of you is quite extraordinary. And I really appreciated the comments and questions from everybody in the room, and recognize and respect and have great empathy for everything you're all through.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and thank you for the support you're providing to our communities that need it so badly, and for the strength that you bring to those around you. It's quite magical. Thank you.
Well, why don't we call it a day and wish everybody a good afternoon. Keep in touch.
Thanks, everybody.